U.S. officials tell CNN government agencies have given the White House a variety of options to respond to North Korea. And of course, we're covering this from all angles this morning. CNN's Kyung La is in Seoul, South Korea. And Daily Telegraph columnist and historian Tim Stanley is in London. Kyung, I want to start with you. What's on the menu here as it relates to the response to North Korea?
It's a limited response. This is not a buffet. We're talking about the diet special here because the United States does not have a lot of options ahead of them. We're talking about a rogue nation. They don't have a lot of trade. There aren't a lot of tricks left in the bag for the United States to pull out. They are going to try. But everyone who's watched this conflict knows that the response, there isn't that much that they can do other than try to add some additional sanctions. But I want to add something, Victor. We're in just the last 20 minutes or so, we're getting the first official response from North Korea. This is very important because we have not yet heard from North Korea since December 7th when all of this started to unfold. North Korean releasing via its state-run news agency, KCNA, saying that it is being framed. North Korea adding that they want to see the evidence that President Obama and the FBI says that they have, that they can prove the opposite, that they have nothing to do with this, and that North Korea believes it has every right to retaliate. But they wouldn't retaliate on innocent moviegoers. They would choose to retaliate on the originators of the insult, the originators of the movie. And curiously, they say that they want to work with America, have a mutual investigation to try to figure out who's the source of the hack. Well, the United States says they absolutely have evidence to prove so far that North Korea absolutely is behind the hack of Sony Pictures.
Tim, is it credible to think, Tim, that North Korea is being framed here? What's been unusual about this hacking happens often in this new global tech society, but that the hackers goaded Sony time after time and tried to embarrass them publicly. What do you think about this claim that North Korea has been framed?
Well, you say it's unusual, but actually it's perfectly normal for a group of hackers who obviously have political affiliation or sympathy with a foreign regime to do something, and then that foreign regime to say that had nothing to do with us. So a few months ago it was discovered that malware was attacking embassies and governments that were formerly part of the Eastern Bloc. It was very obviously an attack which was to the advantage of the Kremlin. But of course the Kremlin said that had absolutely nothing to do with us. So actually, far from this being a surprise, North Korea is following a typical pattern when it comes to cyber terrorism. A cell which is apparently unaffiliated with the government, but is very pro the North Korean government, does something, and then the government is at liberty to say that had nothing to do with us. And the problem is that Western democratic governments do not have the tools to link those two. They can't do it. So it's likely that in a few months down the line we're going to see North Korea get away with this.
The denial is unusual, but what I said was that the goading, the teasing of Sony publicly was something that at least I hadn't seen very often. Let me play something that the president said at his end of the year news conference on Friday, and we'll talk about it.
We cannot have a society in which some dictator someplace can start imposing censorship here in the United States. Because if somebody is able to intimidate folks out of releasing a satirical movie, imagine what they start doing when they see a documentary that they don't like.
Now, we know that the Sony CEO says the studio has not given in, but is it likely, Tim, that this will encourage more cyber attacks?
You mean the president saying that they're going to fight back is going to encourage more cyber attacks?
No.
Or the cyber attack itself?
No, Sony's pulling of the movie.
Well, yeah, first of all, it's very frustrating when the president shifts from being very smart like he was over Cuba, being very dumb like he is over this incident. And you always notice his language change and he starts saying things like folks. The reality is that if a private corporation is targeted like this, there's very little that the government should be able to do to intervene to tell the private corporation what to do. Now, Sony pulled out because, first of all, theatres refused to play it. Sony's absolutely right about that. It wasn't that Sony buckled as such, it was that it couldn't get it released. But even if it had done, it was probably right to, because lives were threatened because the hackers invoked the memory of 9/11. Will that encourage future hackers? Maybe it will. So what we've got to see is some kind of collaboration between the FBI and private corporations to make sure that when this sort of thing happens again, those corporations know what to do and know that they have the government's backing. But right now, all the president's doing is saying, the government's right behind you, but you've just heard there are no sanctions that can be put on North Korea. There is nothing the government can do in this occasion. And frankly, those theatres were right to put the safety of their customers first.
Kyung, do we know about any communications between the U.S. and North Korea? Also, China, their state newspaper has released an op-ed this morning criticizing this film. Do we know about any communications with the U.S. about this from either of those countries?
Well, regarding China, that was also to be expected because here in Asia, you know, North Korea is allowed to act because China funds it. That's a well-known fact. So that response was very predictable. But as far as communications, there's no official communications, and I stress the word official, between the United States and North Korea. There are no relations officially. But in talking to many diplomats across Asia, there are discussions. They're very quiet, they're hushed, they are the spy games that you imagine. There are discussions. But here's what's important are these statements, and you have to read these large statements like the one we got this morning and then whittle them down. What is North Korea trying to achieve? What is the next chess move? Because a lot of this, just like the propaganda that comes out of North Korea, a lot of this is show and then the games underneath and the reality beneath that.